Shabbat Shalom. Nice to be back in Shul. Nice to have a Simcha celebration. Mazel Tov to the Gutherman, Vlad Isengard families. As I guess it was 2 years ago, we got to celebrate at Aaron Simcha. It's nice to be able to celebrate again, and Mazel Tov Brin. As many of you know, I just returned from an 18-day trip with 42 members of our Amunah family to Portugal, Spain, and Morocco. What was I thinking? No. It was awesome. It was like a teen tour for adults, except without any of the drama. All right, maybe a little bit of drama, but not that much. Over that time, we ate incredible food. We visited extraordinary sites, we learned together, and we had great fun, including a flamenco dance workshop, which I am not going to perform for you. We learned how to make an authentic Moroccan tangine in Marrakesh, which is this kind of clay dish with the top. And then we were served it around the country about maybe like one or like two or maybe like 20 times. We explored the story of our people in these countries going back over 1,500 years. And I think we became an even closer community. People who didn't even know each other at all learned a lot more about one another. Sometimes maybe they learned even a little bit too much. I'll save that for another sermon. I want to open up with something that happened about a week ago. After an inspiring Shabbat in Marrakesh, we got to daven to pray with the local community on Friday night, which was a very, really interesting and inspiring experience, although less accessible because it was an Orthodox service for many of the women in our group. And then the next morning, we held an egalitarian service in a synagogue that went back 500 years, was no longer being used as a shul, and so they gave it to us to create a beautiful egalitarian service. And then on Saturday night, we went to a riad, which I was thinking was a capital of a country, but it turns out originally it is a traditional home, in this case a Moroccan home, which is a house built around a courtyard. This one was a luxury guest house, and it was absolutely beautiful. We climbed up onto the rooftop and were presented with an elegant evening of food, music, and hospitality. I'm actually going to make the right call here and leave the belly dancing out of the sermon. Now, food on a trip like this can be a little bit complicated. We had people who have celiac disease, lactose intolerance, food allergies, vegan, and of course, many different approaches to keeping kosher. So sometimes we ate in vegetarian restaurants, other times we enjoyed home-cooked kosher meals, and other times we had fish and vegetarian meals. That night I thought we were going to have a catered kosher dinner, so I didn't really worry about it. But then I actually learned that this was going to be a more complicated fish and vegetarian meal, so I told the group. One participant came up to one of the waiters and said, "What kind of fish is it?" The waiter said, "Monkfish." They came up to me and I said, "Uh-oh." I quickly launched a frantic internet search. Surely there must be some other kind of fish and this is getting lost in Google Translate. But monkfish was the fish. And it is a bottom-dwelling anglerfish related to lobster and thus not kosher. I looked desperately then on ChatGPT for any possible rabbinic interpretation over the last thousands of years that could maybe say that monkfish was kosher. And that's how I felt. No luck. And it looked like no dinner. Our Israeli tour guide, David, and our Moroccan guide, Ahmed, and the restaurant owner, and I were now engaged in a somewhat animated conversation. I tried to hide it from the group at the time, The owner said he had no alternatives, and the fish was already being prepared for all 45 members of our group. Somewhere along the line of communication, things had gone awry. Meanwhile, 45 hungry participants were waiting and expecting their dinner. I asked the restaurant owner, maybe you have something else, like, I don't know, dig around the cupboards, maybe some cans of sardines, anything you could come up with. The vegan harira, a classic Moroccan tomato and spice soup, was coming out, so time was running out. How were we going to save this dinner? Our trip through the Andalusian peninsula of Spain and Portugal, I don't know what's going to happen. You'll have to sit tight. Our trip there and through North Africa was a deep dive into our people's history. Jews have been in Spain most likely for around 2,000 years, coming around the same time as the destruction of the Second Temple. And many came to North Africa, according to some scholars, as early as after the destruction of the First Temple, 2,500 years ago. Now, it wasn't always perfect for these Jewish communities. There were moments of great flourishing, and there were moments of deep challenge. For example, we encountered both with one of our greatest sages, Moses Maimonides, who there's a saying, Mi Moshe lo haya kemo Moshe. From Moses, our teacher, the original Moses, until Moses Maimonides, there were none like Moses. Which, of course, which one is it referring to? And that's the point. Rambam was a towering figure, an amazing philosopher, extraordinary legal scholar who authored texts like the Mishnah Torah, the absolute key guide to the laws of Judaism. He wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, a key text that brings in Aristotelian philosophy in sync with traditional Judaism. He wrote a great commentary, Perush al Mishnah, and he wrote letters to various Jewish communities, helping them deal with issues like forced conversion. And at the same time, he was a leading physician. Born in Cordoba in southern Spain in 1138, he grew up in this rich Jewish culture. His father, a Dayan, a Jewish leader, and soaked up also incredible secular culture and learning. We walked through this Jewish quarter where he grew up. We visited a synagogue named in his honor. We stood where he lived and he learned. But in 1148, the Almohads, a strict and more intolerant Muslim dynasty, took over the region and imposed harsh policies on religious minorities. Maimonides and his family fled to Fez, to Morocco, where he continued his learning and where we then also visited. He is one of the many thousands and thousands of Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal in the 14th and 15th centuries who spread around the Mediterranean and beyond. One of our travelers, Alison Cook, traces her Jewish ancestry back to the Jews of Monastir. Apparently there was a monastery and they took on that name. And that's back in Toledo in the 1400s. After the expulsion, her family moves and eventually settles in Macedonia, and those Jews kept their name as the Monastir Jews. Our Jewish story is complex and rich, wandering and rooted, fragile and resilient. During the so-called Golden Age, when Jews, Muslims, and Christians coexisted in Spain, Jews not only created a very vibrant Jewish life for themselves, but actually also were leading thinkers in science, in medicine, in translation, and philosophy, who shaped the entire culture of Spain and then Morocco. All of that made the later waves that were to come of Christian anti-Semitism, forcing Jews to flee over and over again, so devastating, not only to the Jewish communities, which it certainly was, but in fact to those countries where their own civilizations, learning, and economies then did not flourish in the same ways. And similarly, in Muslim lands, though Islam traditionally granted Jews a privileged status as dhimmis, people of the book, tolerance there wasn't always consistent. In Morocco, we visited neighborhoods called melahs. The word comes from the Arabic melch, salt, because Jews were often involved in the salt trade. And these Jewish quarters were typically near royal palaces or governorships, and Jews often rose to influential positions, being advisors to the king, as is still the case actually today. And although Jews, many and most of the community, fled Morocco after the founding of the modern state of Israel, many because they were passionate Zionists, many also because of the local tensions that arose with the birth of the state of Israel, there still is a small but vibrant Jewish community that we got to experience with our own eyes. One of the unbelievable things about Morocco is that the king wrote a constitution right after the Arab Spring. Different Arab countries handled that time differently. And this king decided he would listen to many of the push towards democracy, and he wrote a constitution, or they did, in 2012. And in the preamble, like the Declaration of Independence, it goes into the history of the country. And it speaks explicitly about the Berber tribes that were there and the Hebrew groups that were there thousands of years ago. This is something pretty remarkable to have in this central text of a Muslim majority country. The recent Abraham Accords have opened up new lines of friendship, which we felt with our guide Ahmed, who led us with amazing love and openness. It was a real model, a vision of coexistence. This week's Torah reading contains that same vision, even though it's 4,000 years old. The Torah reminds us that Isaac and Ishmael, who are separated, remain brothers to the end. Their estrangement is not of their own making. It emerges from this conflict with their mothers, Hagar and Sarah, and the painful decisions of their parents, Abraham sending away Hagar and Ishmael, his son. Yet when Abraham dies at the end of this week's Parsha, the Torah says that Abraham breathed his last, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him together. Our sages really like to reflect on this and see the evolution of these characters. One midrash says that Ishmael shal b'tshuva, that he repented, he changed his ways, he came to a place of maturity, and he returned. And Isaac too must have grown. He chose to stand beside the brother who once threatened his place. I think this reunion can symbolize coexistence. Two siblings walking together without hatred. Jewish tradition, of course, sees Isaac as the ancestor of the Jewish people, and while Muslims see Ishmael as their forebearer, because the Quran, their sacred text, links Ishmael, or in Arabic Ismail, with Abraham as the son who partners with his father in sacred work. Two brothers, two peoples, one story. And then the Torah adds this amazing detail. It says that Isaac went to live in a city called Be'er Lahai Roi, the city where the well of the living one who sees me. A really interesting understanding of God as someone who is always present, seeing us, supporting us like a well of water. This is the same place where Hagar, desperate for water, when she's sent out of Abraham's house and she is despairing, she encounters God and finds this water who saves her and her son. Where God says in that scene, "Do not fear, because I've heard," God hears the voice of the boy, Kasher Husham, Basher Husham, in the place where he is. Isaac choosing to live there, I think, is profound. He situates his life in the place where his brother was seen, was heard, was delivered by God. I love how the Torah lets their lives touch the same sacred ground, each one of them in the story. Coexistence begins with just that, making space for another story. All right, I will go back to the fish storm. After several very tense minutes, when I was getting my apology speech written, it turned out that the owner said that they could find some St. Peter's fish, which, of course, then I looked up, and there are two types, and one is not kosher, and luckily this was the kosher one. And then the restaurant somehow just went right into the souk outside to a local fishmonger and procured 45 portions in record time. And when the tangine lids were lifted, there was our kosher fish dinner. Now, many people had worked behind the scenes. Our Israeli staff, our Muslim Moroccan guide, Ahmed, and of course the Muslim restaurant owner. It was kind of a simple moment of cooperation, not some grand political reconciliation that we might all hope for. But it was just a simple act of respect and shared purpose. This is the kind of action of a shared future that Jews and Muslims need. Coexistence, shared meals, shared respect, and shared space. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it come to fruition, and let us all say, Amen.